Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're jumping in a time machine and heading back to what many call a legendary era for music, 90s hip hop. We're going to find out why this decade was way more than just some cool beats and clever rhymes. Let's get right into it. So, you always hear this term, the golden age, but what does that really mean? Okay, think of it like this. In the 90s, hip hop went from being just a style of music to a full-blown cultural movement. I mean, it literally changed how people dressed, how they talked, and yeah, even how they walked, not just in America, but all over the world. To really get it, you gotta understand that before the 90s, hip hop was kind of like this amazing indie game that only a small, dedicated community knew about. But in the 90s, that game got a massive update and launched worldwide. And that change was huge, seriously. The music basically jumped from local block parties in places like New York and LA, where it all started, and landed smack dab on the global music charts. All of a sudden, it felt like everyone was listening. Now, to understand hip-hop, you have to know its roots. Think of these as the four original character classes. You had the DJs. They were the beat makers creating the entire soundscape. You had the rappers, the storytellers on the mic. Then you had breakdancing, the physical moves, and graffiti, the visual art. And in the 90s, every single one of these elements leveled up big time. And every great story needs a rivalry, right? Well, the 90s had one of the biggest in music history. It was basically the ultimate boss battle between two major teams, the East Coast and the West Coast. And they had totally different play styles. The East Coast was all about these complex, kind of gritty lyrics that told stories of daily struggles. And they did it by sampling old jazz and soul records. The West Coast, though, totally different. It was much more laid back and cinematic, with a sound built on heady bass and funky synths. Perfect for cruising in your car. So yeah, two sides of the same coin, but with completely different vibes. So on the East Coast roster, you had what I'd call lyrical assassins. You're talking about artists like Nas, incredible storytellers like the Notorious B.I.G., and the absolute powerhouse supergroup, the Wu-Tang Clan. These guys were masters of wordplay, painting these super vivid pictures with their rhymes that just captured that gritty New York feel. Meanwhile, over on the West Coast, you had a whole different crew of icons. Dr. Dre was the master producer, creating that signature laid-back G-funk sound that's a mix of deep funk bass lines and smooth synths. Then you had Snoop Dogg with his unbelievably smooth flow, and of course, Tupac Shakur, who delivered these really powerful, emotional stories. Together, they were making the perfect soundtrack for a sunny California blockbuster movie. But here's the thing. While that East versus West rivalry was huge, it wasn't the whole game. Not even close. Other powerful players were entering the scene, and they started changing all the rules. One of the biggest game changers was gangsta rap. Now, this style was super controversial, and that's because it was brutally honest. Artists were telling these unfiltered stories about the harsh realities of street life. It was raw, it was real, and it absolutely made people listen. And then, on the complete flip side, you had alternative hip-hop. You can think of artists like A Tribe Called Quest or De La Soul as the indie developers of the scene. They broke all the rules, they mixed in jazz and world music, and they focused on creativity and positive messages. They really showed just how flexible and artistic hip-hop could be. And we absolutely cannot talk about the 90s without talking about the incredible women who stepped up. Artists like Queen Latifah and Salt-N-Pepa didn't just make amazing music. They brought messages of female empowerment and independence, and they completely challenged what was a very male-dominated game. Okay, so we've talked about the sounds and the artists, but the game of hip-hop wasn't just about the music. It was also about the culture around it, what we might call the meta today. It was about how you looked, how you moved, and how you expressed yourself. First off, we've got to talk about a key technique, sampling. This was like the original remix culture. Imagine taking a cool 10-second piece from an old funk or jazz song, like a great drum beat or a melody, and then looping it over and over to build a brand new track. That is exactly what producers were doing to create those iconic 90s beats. And of course, there was the fashion. This was the official player gear of the 90s. Think of it like choosing a skin for your character in a video game. Baggy pants, oversized shirts, fresh sneakers. It was a whole look that showed you were part of the culture. And yeah, of course, there was dance. If the fashion was the skin, then the dance moves were the signature emotes. Breakdancing, popping, and locking. These weren't just moves. They were a way to express yourself and connect with the music on a whole other physical level. So all this stuff was happening like 30 years ago. Why are we still talking about it? Well, it's because the legacy of 90s hip hop is absolutely everywhere today. And this brings up a really important question. Was this whole era just about the music? Just beats and rhymes? The answer is a hard no. It was about something much, much bigger.
Here's the thing you really have to understand. Hip-hop gave a voice to entire communities that felt completely ignored. Artists used their music as a platform to talk about real social issues, poverty, racism, inequality. It was like news, social commentary, and art, all rolled into one powerful package.
And the media? Well, that was the ultimate power-up that helped it spread. First, radio stations started putting the songs on the air. Then, music videos on TV turned these artists into global superstars. And by the late 90s, when you had hip-hop in major movies, its place as a dominant cultural force was totally locked in. Just think about the music you listen to right now. The influence of the 90s is undeniable. The storytelling techniques, the production styles, the way artists blend beats and samples, the DNA of 90s hip-hop is baked into so many of today's biggest hits in pop, R&B, and of course, modern rap. So, if we had to boil this whole thing down to one single sentence, this would be it. 90s hip-hop wasn't just a music genre, it was a cultural revolution that gave a voice to a generation and completely changed the world. And that leaves me with one final thought for you. The 90s had its sound, its style, its voice. So the question is, 30 years from now, what sound, what movement are people going to say defined your generation? It's something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.